States of America, and that it has played a crucial role in the past in global climate policies. It has taken leadership shaping international efforts to combat climate change. Now, under President Joe Biden, the United States rejoined the Paris Agreement, signaling a commitment to reducing greenhouse gas emissions for one. However, President Donald Trump recently withdrew once again from the accord, reversing Biden's progress and also raising concern about the future of the global climate action. So this decision has significant implications. This could be particularly on vulnerable nations that are already facing the effects of climate change and so on and so forth. So this morning, Botswana Climate Change Network Programs Officer, Mr. Tshepiso Masilonyane, joins us here in studio to further explore what this really means, what the U.S. withdrawal from the Paris Agreement could have implications on, for one, as one of the major emitters currently. So let me go straight into our discussion. Tshepiso, very good morning to you. Thank you for coming through, and you're welcome.
Good morning, and thanks for having me.
Right. So we do know that the climate action agenda is a concerted global effort. Yeah. We see the COP meetings happening periodically and regularly. Yeah. So then, back in 2015, was it?
17.
When the Paris Agreement was established in 2015. Well, back in 2015, when this global effort came together, and then came up with the Paris Agreement on climate change mitigation. What was it supposed to do? What are some of the terms in there, or some of the elements of that, so that we understand what it is that the Donald Trump is pulling out of? Yeah. Yeah.
So essentially what the Paris Agreement was an agreement by the global community to reduce our emissions, reduce our emissions to effectively reduce or prevent global warming of up to 2 degrees Celsius. So the idea is, the planet is warming, and that's what's causing climate change. And according to the best science, if we stand any chance of reversing climate change, we need to keep the planet from warming by up to 2 degrees Celsius or less. In the instance that we go above that warming, that's 2 degrees, since the beginning of the industrial era. Since the beginning of the industrial era. Before the Paris Agreement, I think warming had gone up by about 1 degree Celsius since the industrial era, so around 2015. The latest science shows that last year, 2024, we breached 1.5 degrees Celsius.
So we have
since
gotten
the industrial, we have gotten warmer. 2024 was officially the world's warmest year on record. 2023 was the world's warmest year on record then. We expect 2024 to beat the record again. So the planet is getting warmer, and essentially the Paris Agreement was, world leaders agreeing we need to keep the planet from further warming, and that means we reduce, greenhouse gas emissions, and primarily, fossil fuel burning fossil fuels, right? And so that agreement got about 197 countries agreeing to it and signing to it, which represented a majority of the emissions, over 98% of the emissions. And so this recent withdrawal of the United States from this important Paris Agreement makes the United States only one of 4 countries that are not party to this agreement.
So, but it's not just in my understanding, and you'll correct me, it's not just to commit to reducing warming, the climate, which has detrimental weather phenomena and weather climate effects. But then also there was a commitment, that loss and damage commitment, monetary commitment to help those affected nations. I want you to also go there, because that's also a real thing in the reversal of this agreement.
And it's actually what motivated the reversal of the withdrawal of the United States from the Paris Agreement. So under the Paris Agreement, there's a principle we call common but differentiated principles, which essentially recognizes that different countries, one, have different capacities, you know, to act on climate change,
right,
primarily financial,
to withstand the effects.
To withstand the effects, and to, you know, acting on climate change. If you're going to mitigate your emissions, there's certain investments that you have to make to set up your renewable energy infrastructure. Adaptation takes significant financing as well, but developing countries primarily
research,
a lot of research. So developing countries primarily do not have the same capacity as developed economies like the United States, China, European Union, etc. So that principle recognizes that different countries have different capacities to act and respond adequately to climate change, and that also different countries have differentiated responsibilities, right? Certain countries are leading emitters versus, you know, Africa collectively is responsible for less than 4%. Botswana is responsible for less than 0.19% of global emissions. And so our responsibility to reduce our emissions, it wouldn't be the same as, you know, a leading emitter like China or India or the EU, for example. And so with that principle in mind, the Paris Agreement under Article 9 of the agreement you know, called on developing nations to support financially developing nations like Botswana to help finance the mitigation and adaptation to climate change. And so different discussions, you know, have progressed since 2015 around what that kind of financing looks like and the mechanisms for how the financing, you know, reaches developing countries. You mentioned the Loss and Damage Fund, which was an agreement coming out of COP29 last year, which essentially recognizes, first of all, that countries, you know, small island developing nations, global south countries that are at the front lines of climate change, that are experiencing, you know, climate crises currently, are experiencing losses of infrastructure, lives, economic loss of cultures, etc., due to climate change today. And so the Loss and Damage Fund is essentially looking at, you know, financing addressing the loss and damage impacts of climate change. We have the Adaptation Fund, etc. And so through Article 9, there's that call for developed countries to contribute to developing countries. So
the U.S. there had committed to a $3 billion US dollar mark. This happened, well, the Paris Agreement was in 2015. The U.S. signed up and effected in 2016, but then it was already in 2017 that the first time that U.S. President Donald Trump pulled the U.S. out of this agreement. What are the reasons, though? I mean, we can look at how it would impact us negatively, but surely the man has his reasons.
It's primarily because of Article 9, that push by the Paris Agreement to mandate developed countries to pay developing countries. And so that capital leaving the United States economy to another country is something that I think President Trump has made clear is not within his, you know, foreign policy. He believes in domesticating the American dollar. So you'd see that outside of the Paris Agreement in you know, other executive orders that he signed just after he got sworn in. You know, the pulling off U.S. foreign aid, for example, across different sectors. And so, the major motivator is Article 9 to say President Trump does not believe they are financially liable to support developing countries to address their climate challenges.
Okay, well, that's a debate that perhaps experts like yourselves can inform the rest of us on, because namely, we would first up name China, European Union, India as the leading emitters. Where would the U.S. lie, though?
I mean, currently, historically, the U.S. is the historical leader of emissions, right, historically. However, you know, we understand that China today is the world's largest emitter, followed by the United States of America, right? So
tell me then, what does this do? Because, I mean, I do hear that the reasons that President Trump forwards, that coughing out $3 billion US dollars to the Green Fund,
Green Climate Fund.
The Green Climate Fund. He says it's going to undermine the U.S. Economy.
Yeah.
He says it's going to leave the United States with a permanent damage. That's what he says. But then when you look at what climate change effects are doing to these countries that are being supported, it is undermining their economy. It is leaving permanent damage. What does this then mean for global climate cooperation? Does that mean the U.S. is Nike is in?
Essentially, that's a position that President Trump is taking here, and we think that leaves a significant vacuum of leadership in global climate governance, and we think it might signal to other, especially leading emitters like China, like India, to then say if the world's number one emitter historically is pulling out and deregulating, then what need do we have to invest in supporting developing countries, right? And so I think we're seeing a loss of leadership in global climate governance that might, compromise the positions that other countries are taking towards, global cooperation on climate action.
Okay, so one of the other things that we're looking at is let's bring it closer to home. Let's bring it closer to home. Bring it to region Africa. Bring it to Botswana. So that now that we're established what the Paris Agreement was meant to be doing, to be achieving, and this pulling out means 3 billion less in the fund. Where is it that we are most impacted, Rona, region Africa and Botswana particularly, so that we can see where it is that we are going to be affected?
I think we're going to see a lot of that impact, number one, in our renewable energy development, right? The development of infrastructure, etc. The United States has been, a key partner in our renewable energy, in facilitating renewable energy development in Botswana. A good example is through USA, the United States government has been supporting the development of a 5 gigawatt renewable energy project between Namibia and Botswana that would see the two countries generating enough power to power Africa. The project is called Power Africa. And so we, with the withdrawal from the Paris Agreement, number one, and also the seizure to US aid as well, we think that the momentum with that particular development will be compromised. But also locally, a more relatable project that Botswana would relate to rooftop solar, right, by BPC. It's a project that that the United States government, through their project Power Africa, has been providing technical support with. And so we expect that might also be compromised as well. And civil society as well has benefited from support from the U.S. government, and we're expecting, that kind of support will stop. It has essentially stopped as well, which I think will, compromise the capacities of grassroots organizations, particularly, your conservation trusts, etc., that have been relying on the support of the United States government to drive grassroots resilience within their communities.
Tell me, when does this affect? Because the first time President Donald Trump did the same, there were contractual difficulties because according to the contractual terms, no country could pull out within, was it 3 years?
So kicked in 2020. Back then.
Back then. So what about this time? When do we expect the absolute stop?
We have a 1-year timeline for the current withdrawal to kick in. And I think we are hoping that between that time, perhaps developments and conversations between governments would have hopefully
mitigated it somehow.
Mitigated it somehow. We also expect that in that timeline, the European Union has been a leader in calling for and mobilizing governments around global climate action as well. We are hoping that, that structural adjustments around the global leadership, will also be made.
The first time President Trump pulled the U.S. out of the Paris Agreement, we saw even from locally within the U.S. some pockets that not in agreement with it pulled together to at least augment what the government would be stopping to do. What are we seeing currently this time?
What we're currently seeing is, especially from private sector, immediately after President Trump's signing of the executive order for America to move from the Paris Agreement, we had business leaders like Bloomberg coming in to then say they will step in to foot the bill. And so we are looking at perhaps private sector as well. The conversation around private sector participation in climate finance has progressed. I think we can look to non-state sources and non-state leadership in climate finance, given the current vacuum. And so we're seeing, philanthropy and private sector coming in within the United States of America to sort of foot the bill.
Okay. What do we see happening in Botswana in terms of climate action?
I think Botswana's situation is quite concerning, because when you look at our climate plans in the form of our nationally determined contributions, 90% of the actions that we've committed to take rely on foreign aid, right? Foreign finance. We've only committed about 10% of our budget for the NDCs to be coming from Botswana, which is concerning. It puts us in this current precarious position where we have detailed strategies on how we intend to adapt to climate change and how we intend on mitigating our emissions. But 90% of that budget has to be footed by someone else. And so that's quite concerning. And at the Botswana Climate Change Network, we are consistently calling, for the localization of climate finance and the financing of our climate strategies. It needs to be coming from Botswana, lest we are in a position right now where the continuity of our climate plans are compromised because our foreign partners have pulled out of agreements like the Paris Agreement. We are hopeful, though, because the President has made mention of an ESG strategy that he has mentioned will be a financing strategy for green economy development. We are looking forward to hearing more from it, hopefully from the budget, but he has made mention of it previously following the assent of his administration. And so we're looking very closely to see how this ESG strategy is built up.
But beyond the ESG strategy, how at a policy level are we faring out? I know that we have energy policy, but overall, at the policy framework level, how are we faring out to facilitate or enable such a state that would be the ideal?
So we in my opinion, have a strong, policy framework. We have a national climate change policy, right, that sets the policy environment. We have a climate change strategy and action plan that goes into detail, right? It's a detailed plan with detailed strategic actions and actors and a budget. We have the NDCs as well that's really detailed and has been celebrated as an exemplary NDC for African countries. I think where we're falling short is in implementation and how we coordinate, right, the implementation of our NDCs. Currently, we have a climate change strategy and action plan that was adopted in 2018, whose actions
what are NDCs? These are national commitments.
Yeah, national commitments.
Yes.
That Botswana makes to the international community to say, ABC.
Right.
And now our climate change strategy is now looking locally to say, okay, but how are we going to achieve what we have committed ourselves to, right? And so we have had, I think the first deadlines for NDCs were not NDC, climate change strategy, was 2021. Second deadlines, I think 2023. And we have not made any of the deadlines under the climate change strategy. We have not been able to review implementation of our climate change strategy. And our position is that is primarily because we have a coordination issue, right? We don't have a coordinating agency for...
is that not the Ministry of Environment? Or is not... pulling all the parties together?
Currently, coordination of climate action in Botswana in terms of the governance structure is coordinated by the team in the Department of Meteorology, Ibiza, the Climate Change Unit, that we believe is under-resourced, both in terms of the human capital and financial. What we think is we need a climate change agency that has better coordinating capacity, right? To coordinate across the different sectors, because climate change cuts across different sectors, from energy to transport to agriculture to environment.
Absolutely.
And so we are the position that coordinating climate actions and implementing our climate strategy should not be, domiciled within the Ministry of Environment.
It's not a meteorological factor.
It's not a meteorological sector. It's a human development and economic development factor. And so we need to elevate the capacity and the positioning of the governance infrastructure to better coordinate the implementation of our climate strategies. Yeah.
You're looking forward to a climate-sensitive budget in any way? What do you anticipate out of the budget? The strategy meetings are sitting this week, so are you even participating from the climate change sector?
I think what we've consistently called for is for climate-sensitive budgeting that we have not seen. We are not hopeful that yet that our budget will be climate responsive. But what we have seen, again, this is simply rhetoric, right, from our political leadership, is rhetoric around green economy development, right? Rhetoric around critical minerals development. And critical minerals is essentially the minerals you need to develop your renewable energy technologies like solar panels, etc. And rhetoric around the renewable energy sector. This is rhetoric that executive leadership has made mention of. We are not sure how they will be reflected within the budget, but we'll be keeping a close eye on how climate is reflected in our national budget.
Okay. Well, let me thank you for coming through the Tshepiso. We'll also catch up with you soon after budget, and then sooner after the U.S. withdrawal is actualized to check what the situation is. Let me thank you for coming through.
Thank you very much.
All right. Tshepiso Masilonyane from the Botswana Climate Change Network programs. We're talking about just how the United States of America has played a very crucial role in global climate policy so far. We can even attest to that as Botswana. They have taken a leadership role shaping international efforts here and there. But then under President Joe Biden, the U.S. government rejoined the Paris Agreement, which was pulled out of initially by President Trump. But then we see President Trump doing the exact same once again. Recently withdrew from this accord, reversing Biden's progress. How that affects us is what we've been discussing with Tshepiso. Stay with us.